the importance of the hearsay rule. And this is part of the Answering Critics, part of the Bourbon Tonight. So what's fascinating is, once again, we get the illustrative example of the Nick Rekieta case, the case that keeps on giving. So one of the board members, really believed what a lot of the people in the anti-Rekieta can't believe. They have all these conclusions about what they think has been factually proven that actually hasn't been factually proven at all. In many cases, hasn't even been factually alleged. And it's an example of the importance of the hearsay rule. Why does the hearsay rule exist? So those that don't know, the hearsay rule is a simplified way is it's a version of the old telephone game. I don't know if any of you all remember that from being kids. What is it like? First time I did it was a kid. We were all sitting around in a circle, a bunch of us at a birthday party, and one person would whisper something to that person, would whisper it, and all the way around to see how butchered would the rumor be by the time it got all the way around to the end of the circle. It was crazy. It got totally butchered. And it got even more controversial because one kid said something bad about another kid, and he stuck it into the rumor to make everybody mad at each other. So that was the whole other thing. So the dramatic introduction to the telephone game. But hearsay is somewhat similar. The principle is that unless you see it yourself, or you're in court, and the evidence is evidence that's direct evidence from direct observation, from direct revelation, if you will, it's usually not trustworthy or reliable. So saying, well, I believe something is true because George told me it was true, we say that's not reliable. If George says it's true, let George testify to its truth and the basis of it, the source of his information. Let's corroborate it. We find even less reliable and trustworthy when somebody says, well, George said, that Jack said, that Joe said, that Gene said, that Jill saw. Right. Then you have the true telephone game. And so because of the history of this being unreliable basis, empirically, relates to the philosophy of knowledge. It's where the law intersects with philosophy about how do we know things? How do we know things to be true? How do we know things that we believe? My brother, Professor Gordon Prescott Barnes, is a professor of philosophy up in New York. One of the things he studies is philosophy of knowledge and these precise questions: the nature of belief, the nature of truth, where it comes from, how we can know it to be so. And what we've discovered through our legal system over many centuries is the one thing we know usually isn't so is something that because Joe said it was so. Or Joe said, George said, Jack said, Gene said it was so. So let me give you what actually happened in the Rekieta case versus what one of these board members believes happened in the Rekieta case. So in the Rekieta case, all we have is sworn documents by a police officer. What the police officer reports in those documents is other people's statements and his personal observations of social media statements and videos from YouTube. That's it. Contrary to what this board member believes, the police officer never interviewed anybody, never investigated anybody, never observed directly anything other than what he saw on the internet. That's it. Right? And what he recounts is what another officer told him. Right? And this other officer took a phone call from a third party. And this phone call from this third party was the person said that they were a pastor at Nick Rekieta's church. No evidence from the documents we have that this was ever independently confirmed or corroborated, by the way. Right? There's nothing in the documents that shows that or substantiates that at all. So imagine, when you're taking this apart from a legal perspective, like in trial, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the source of that claim for a factual statement? How do I, if I want to make that statement, how do I support it with admissible evidence? If I want to rebut it, How do I rebut it? Either with admissible evidence or showing why it's not admissible evidence, or if it is, why it's not reliable, why it's not trustworthy, why it's not credible. Okay? That's the core of what almost all trials really are. And so the first thing you would do is, okay, what's the source of this factual claim? Well, the factual claim is that this officer says he talked to another officer who says he talked to another person on the phone who claimed to be this person. First thing you would want if you're is give me corroboration of that. Go out and get that person's statement, so I know that's what actually happened. Because otherwise, what stops me calling in and going, "Hey, I'm Joe Biden's pastor, and I've been hearing some disturbing things," and just repeating all this. I'm a mandatory reporter, so I think you got to go raid 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the address, right? So that was just one of the many problems. Okay, so then you get to the next step. All right. So what is the pastor? What is this person who says they're the pastor says that that he has this information? Exactly the source is not disclosed in the report. Right? So it's now reported. So we don't know what the basis of it is. We don't know if it's one person talked to him. We don't know if it's nobody talked to him. We don't know if it's 10 people talked to him. We don't know. Because, again, there was no independent corroboration or confirmation of even the pastor's statement. Least of all, what people supposedly told the pastor, who it was who told it to him, when they told it to him, where they told it to him. We get this disjointed timeline where time is not even presented. When was this statement made? Where was this statement made? How was this statement made? Who made this statement? And he says that a family member, other church petitioners, someone who is a school teacher told him these things. And that's what's reported. And by the way, none of them he doesn't say that anybody has ever observed any illegal activity. And we don't even know for sure how much came from the pastor because of the way it's presented in the various affidavits. And again, these are cops that fill out these affidavits on a daily basis. So one of the things you look for is, okay, what's normal? What should be here? What's not here? What's omitted from the information list? This was my problem with all of Law 2, pretending to be doing an honest search warrant affidavit analysis and not having this basic information provided to people. Right? But so what you end up getting is the cop told me that the person who said they were the pastor told him, apparently over the phone, not independently confirmed or corroborated, that other people told the pastor that other people told them these different things. And it was, he's walking out of church, having an affair, has marks on his arms, and at some identified time, at some identified point, somebody said the kids looked hungry and had days-old clothes. That was it. Right. And then he goes on the internet, sees a couple of other social media rumors being spread, sees Rekieta on the show, and that magically get a search warrant to seize his home, to seize him, a search warrant to actually physically arrest him. Find all the search warrants for that, and to bang and knock down the door of a home with kids in it, with a SWAT team type approach. So that's what is even alleged there is 3 or 4 kids at some point told someone who's identified as a preschool teacher, which none of them are in preschool, they were hungry and that their clothes were a couple of days old. Now, that he had red marks on his arm, that he was slurring his words on a video with something that looked like maybe white powder on his nose. And that was pretty much it. Guess what this board member believes. This board member, like a lot of these Rekieta people, believe that all the kids directly reported their parents to the government authorities for severe neglect. Of course, it never happened. It's not even alleged, but believes this is what happened. In fact, the story develops the same way a telephone story works. This is the way hearsay works, right? When you think because somebody said such and such to so and so to such there and then, all you start to extrapolate and infer the underlying facts are true. Like for hearsay, it's you believe a fact is true because somebody else said it was true, right? You believe it for what's called the truth of the matter asserted under the evidentiary rules. So here, what they believe to be absolutely true is a story that goes like this. A bunch of family members, friends, community members, pastors tried to intervene with the Rekietas because the kids were starving and had no clothes, and that the Rekietas were giving them drugs for breakfast and kept trying to intervene, and they just refused to intervene and refused to do anything, refused to take any corrective action. So the pastor, as a mandatory reporter, as the leader of this group trying to do the intervention, went to the authorities to try to save the kids. And that they all individually, the school teachers, the pastor, the individual church members, the family member, they all went down and gave full statements, and the cop did full interviews and corroborated and confirmed everything, and that's why they went in. That never happened. And yet, this board member has no doubt that it did happen. So certain about it, he's upset at my criticism of the legal aspects of the case. And there's a bunch of people, this will get even more extravagant as time goes on. And I've watched it in live time. Where I'll get emails and messages. How can you defend someone who's dealing drugs to 6-year-olds? It's not even alleged. But no, proven fact. Proven fact, Barnes, right in the court, please. Unless you're one of those conspiracy theorists. Right, like that. It's not even alleged. But this is why hearsay is so problematic. When you believe the truth of something based on somebody else saying it happened or occurred, then you're likely to have an unreliable narrative, an untrustworthy basis for an empirical belief. And that's why we exclude hearsay. There's a policy behind it. It's not just some esoteric rule. The Confrontation Clause enforces it constitutionally, as we discussed last Sunday. But the actual nature of the truth is almost entirely unknown in the Rekieta case, beyond what the police say they found at his house. That's really all there is at this point. There's other basic things they get wrong. So this person thought, this was a mandatory reporter. That's part of the narrative. No, he wasn't. In Minnesota, a pastor is exempted and excluded from the mandatory reporting laws for anything disclosed to him in the capacity as a pastor, if it's part of that pastor counseling privilege. So there's no mandatory reporting requirement for him. And not only that, mandatory reporting wouldn't apply anyway. Mandatory reporting only applies when you personally observe the conduct or have specific direct testimony of the conduct that is severe enough to be a crime. It's meant to be for abuse cases. The pastor, by his own admission, said he didn't think the kids were in any imminent risk of any harm at all. And he didn't personally observe anything. So in fact, he was not, by any definition, even if he wasn't already excluded because of the petitioner privilege, he wasn't a mandatory reporter, period. Why does the cop say so? That once you understand what the cop is doing, cop knows he's not a mandatory reporter. What is he trying to do? He's trying to make it sound more authoritative. Well, a mandatory reporter told me this. So we can always trust a mandatory reporter. That's the goal, to mislead people, to deceive. But that's how you take apart a case like that. Some people are like, well, how could you know these things before the search warrant affidavit was disclosed? Because it was there in the detention warrant affidavit. That what was there and not there told me, here's what you're likely to find in the future. That's applying common sense and, to some degree, experience in this field. But the hearsay rule is important, and it's one you should apply every day in your everyday life. Right? Ask yourself, how do I know something to be true? Somebody tells you something about a friend. Somebody tells you something about a family member. Somebody tells you something about something in your workplace. This is the most common place, probably the number one place people experience the harmful nature of hearsay. How do we call that colloquially? Right? There's a word we have for it in our everyday conversation to describe hearsay and its unreliable nature, its tendency to be nasty. We call it gossip because that's what it is. Gossip. Right? So when we hear gossip, we don't think, oh, that's reliable. That's trustworthy. I'm definitely going to act on that. Right? Because we know how unreliable and untrustworthy it is. Because we've often either been the victim of it or made the mistake of relying on it. Right? I mean, think about personal relationships, professional relationships, other things where you acted on, so-and-so said this about you. Wow, right? Yeah. And then and you find out it's not true. And you're like, dadgummit, why did I listen to hearsay? Why did I listen to gossip? Why did I listen to rumors? So, apply the rule of hearsay is one of the great, a lot of the principles of the law are meant to reflect common sense, are meant to be part of how do we discover truth, right? And the adversarial process is all about what I talk about. Motivation is the master of reason. Reason is not the master of motivation. You want to improve your reasoning, shift your motivation. And what does our adversarial process do? It says we're going to give you a motivation to advocate for this side. We're going to give you a motivation to advocate for the other side. Right? With some understanding that improves the probability that through the contest of that, we'll get a better sense of truth. The rule of hearsay is the same thing. It's that we can't trust information we get second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand, fifth-hand. We need to trust information based on direct observation and based on reasonable inferences from that direct observation. That's what we should have. And otherwise not depend, rely, or defer to information because an authority figure gives it to us.